All right. Hi. Sorry, I'm 4 minutes late. Can you hear me? Just to confirm.
Yes.
Yes, we can get.
So we'll start. Just pause and just ask before we proceed. Just ask if people have any specific questions with regards to what we've looked at so far. Any questions, concerns? Perhaps you might have come across something that you thought was interesting and is worth sharing to everybody else in the group. Random thoughts about the respective. And here comes Jackson with an outside email address at 3rd year. Why? Right? Oh well, I suppose you want to. It's fine. Do you have any random thoughts with regards to perhaps what you might have discussed with your fellow group members in relation to what we've looked at so far? Nothing? Okay.
Yeah, I have.
Yes, please. Why is it that it's always Peter asking these questions? I wonder if Peter's. I remember Peter telling me that you work, right? Any chance that you do a bit of do you do any sort of software development or you're working, yeah?
Yes, I am, but not really. It's not related, but I'm just kind of having a bit of industry experience, like what we are discussing and what really happens in this industry.
Right. Sorry, I hope I won't disturb you. Just hold on to your thought. There's something really interesting that happens as you go high up the hierarchy, right? In terms of the years, as you progress high up the years, you begin to gradually develop interest in certain areas, right? So perhaps some of you guys are gravitating more towards, software engineering in general. I encourage you to explore this path. There are certain things that we are certainly not going to cover in this course because it's meant to be an introduction. So if you want to learn a bit more about software engineering, you probably have to do it on your own. But of course, you have lecturers that are available to help guide you if you are interested in that area. If it so happens that you've become interested in web development because of some of the things that you're discussing in 3010, by all means, explore those areas. Now, I'm not teaching that course myself. I am not sure if you're going to look at some of the more modern development frameworks, for instance, frameworks that are used on the server side and on the front end in 3010. If not, what you're going to have to do is try and poke around an area that interests you, right? So if you think you are a user interface type person, so you get excited developing front end interface on an application, explore that area. If you go to places like is it Go Zambia Jobs or something? I don't know if it's Go Job Zambia, whatever. You'll find that increasingly there are certain firms that are looking for individuals that have a particular set of skill sets. Right? Increasingly now they're actually looking for people that have expertise developing front-end interfaces using more modern frameworks like React, for instance, or Angular, right? You probably won't. I don't know if you are covering these things in 3010. If you're not, you'd have to do that on your own. If you're a sort of person who has developed an interest on the server side, again, I don't know if you've already started looking at server-side scripting in 3010, another exciting area, right? So you'll be the person who'll be writing the business logic, right? The processing that takes place as the user sending through requests to the server, right? So interacting with the database and dynamically generating content. If you're a person who has developed some sort of interest in databases, you'd have to, I guess you'd have to be more innovative and just take it up. I guess do a bit of exploration on your own, because I don't know if you're doing this in 3010, but these days increasingly people are ditching so-called relational database management systems, right? And so what you'd have to do then is just try and read up a bit more and try and start experimenting. The time for experimentation is right now, right? So yeah, I don't know when you get to start doing, is it a bit of networking or something, data communications and networks or something, I think it's 4th year. But anyways, sorry, Peter, to cut you short. I just thought I would put it out there, right? Interesting things happening, especially beginning 3rd year, a lot of interesting things. And also something else to think about here is how you could potentially combine your minor with your major. There are so-called startups these days. If you are a person who is doing civic education, for instance, can you combine some aspects of what you're doing in civic education with ICTs, right? Maybe come up with some app or something. And the time is now to start thinking about these ideas. But anyways, Peter, sorry to have cut you short. I thought I would say that. Question. I don't know if Peter is still there, but I can see him there. Your microphone is muted. I don't know if you want to say something, Peter.
Okay, thanks. I was saying, okay, I'll just ask you in the interest of time. So the first one is the issue of to do with the legal. Let's say, for example, the way the University of Zambia has got a software with Zanaco. Then maybe assuming I'm the one who programmed that software, then I discover that another university needs such kind of a software. Will it be legal to do the same software, like or using the same, like the one I programmed for the University of Zambia, I use it for another organization?
Brilliant question, interesting question. It turns out that that would be dependent on the sort of agreement you entered into with the University of Zambia, whether they would decide to claim ownership or copyright access to the source code, right? But it's usually the case that I mean, if you are an integration specialist, a person that kind of like develops custom software in a particular domain. At this stage, I guess in Zambia, you probably would be allowed to do that, right? But you'd have to be smart, obviously, as you're entering into that agreement. These are some of the gray areas that you'd want to make sure are ironed out before you enter into a formal agreement with the company. But so the short answer is it depends. It depends on what sort of agreement you got into. A number of these applications that are providing services by way of integrating, let's say, banks with mobile payment platforms, for instance, I would like to think have copyright access because quite a good number of them, last time I checked, would offer the same solution to an entity like Stanbic, then be able to replicate what they did with Zanaco, for instance. Because the idea is the same. It's all about the idea, right? So yeah, it depends, what sort of agreement you'd have entered into.
Okay, sir. The second one, on the issue of project failure, because not every project will succeed. So assuming you've embarked on a project and maybe it lasts even for a year, you've invested, maybe the customer has paid even a down payment and the project fails. Who's going to incur the cost? Does it also affect the customer, the impact on the company developing the project?
Well, so it depends, right? So what would typically happen is you'd be dragged to court, obviously. I mean, it's a legal question now. So you'd probably be dragged to court so that you pay back the money because you haven't delivered the product. And we've seen this happen at UNZA. There was that Odell laboratory that you're talking about. I don't want to say it failed, but it was almost failing. It got to a stage where the contractor, so the UNZA, through the School of Education, because that lab is a project that was done by the School of Education in conjunction with IDE. And so they got to a stage where they wanted to drag the client to court. And the idea of dragging the client to court is for them to be able to pay back the money because they haven't delivered, right? But if you're a developer, right, you have to look at the bigger picture here. Your image is going to be dented, right? Once people discover that Peter runs the software development firm that never sees through projects, then the likelihood of you landing a project, probably the odds of you landing a project will gradually decrease, right? So, but it's a legal question, and you'd most likely be dragged to court so that you pay back the down payment. Because the idea of a down payment is you're given an assurance that you're going to see the project through, right? If the project fails, you'd have to, you probably have to reimburse the client the money that they paid you or something, with interest, I suppose, in some instances. I hope that answers your question, but it rarely comes to that. Worst case scenario is usually what will typically happen with projects that might fail. The failure could be viewed from the perspective, from the lens of time, right? So worst case scenario is a project that was supposed to be done in 3 months to drag on for maybe a year or two. And in the process, it's likely that the client or the customer will end up paying a little bit of extra money because, potential costs associated with the project will gradually increase with time, inflation and things of that nature.
All right, the last one now.
Yeah.
On the issue of pricing, I remember at some point you mentioned something like, if let's say the customer is not willing to pay according to what the developer is asking for. In some instances, the developer will reduce on the functionality of the software in order to meet what the buyer is willing to pay. So
right
now, if he compromises on the functionality of the software in order to not to make a loss, won't it affect? I don't know how I can put it, but because the customer is not willing what you're asking for, then you end up compromising on the quality of the software. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you can just shed more light on that.
Well, so I don't really want to say you're compromising on the quality per se, but there's this notion or idea of prioritizing the requirements, right? So once you come up with a set of requirements, one of the things you typically do is you prioritize them. So you rank them based on what is extremely important. And that's something that you'd have to do if it turns out that the client or the customer doesn't have or is unable to pay the price associated with whatever it is they want you to develop. So what you do is you strike a compromise, right? And it's so the thing to think about here is that as you are deriving these requirements, you're not just coming up with these requirements on your own, right? You are constantly interacting with the client, with the customer. So in the process, obviously, these are some of the things that you discuss and you explain to them that a potential alternative would be to leave out some of the functionalities so that you just maybe focus on what could be the most important features of the software. And the idea behind that is that software evolves, right? At a later stage, maybe the client will be happy with the product, and then they'll come back to you and request that you implement the missing features. So there's a difference here between the two different things. It's possible that you might come up with a piece of software that has all the features stated by the client, but then the quality of the software would be somewhat low or something. So two different things then. Key thing, consultation, right? Frequent consultation with the client or the customer to make sure that you're doing the right thing. Make sure that you're on the same page or something. Any other questions, random questions, comments? No. Okay, good stuff. But before we continue our conversation, I hope you've seen this. Just to, you're used to this by now. First draft of the final exam is already out. You know what that means. The moment you start seeing these things, then you know that the end is near. I just have, I guess, friendly advice to you, right? Now, whenever something bad happens in society, there are almost always people that will benefit from that, right? So you have to think about what's happening from that perspective, from that lens, right? If you look around you, this whole COVID-19 thing, there are people that are complaining they've lost jobs and whatnot, but on the flip side, there are people that are raking in money, right, because of the same pandemic. I guess if you're selling masks or something, then you're making a killing or something, right? But what I wanted to say here is, if you're one of those who's been with us from the time we transitioned to online teaching, I do encourage you to continue doing this because you stand a lot to gain. What I see is a sort of situation where a lot of your colleagues will have to redo this course, right? The obvious advantage to you is that you get to graduate much earlier than those that won't be able to do this course, right? Because you have to repeat the course, obviously. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you look at this, but I just thought I'd mention this. You want to take this seriously. If you thought that that the UNZA was going to decide to do what is it the Ministry of Education is doing, where they'll say we'll redo, we'll have to restart the academic year next year, that's not happening. You know, this ship is already sailing. There's no going back. We're already halfway through. If I were you, I would just play the game here, right? Just play along, I suppose. Anyway, so there's that. And then something else I wanted to mention here is that tomorrow's interaction, I'm hoping we're going to finish off specification today. What I want us to do tomorrow is to have a more informal interaction where we have a back and forth. So in your respective groups, I would want for us to take turns. I'll send out a schedule of the order of how we're going to do this. So prepare as groups. We want you to walk us through the tentative list of stakeholders and just an idea, basic ideas around potential elicitation techniques that you think you're going to take advantage of, right, as you're collecting these requirements. And then possibly specific data collection processes that you're going to make use of, right? So if it's a questionnaire, what platform do you plan to use? And the idea behind this is we're setting the stage, so the elicitation requirements assignment is going to be available tomorrow, right? I'm actually tempted to also make available the SRS assignment tomorrow as well, so that you can already start working towards the SRS document. But we want to see if there's something we can do to course correct at this stage. So I want us to make use of tomorrow's interaction to do this. So just brace yourselves. If you're in the house and you're representing a group, just make sure that either you or one of your team members, at least one of your team members, joins us tomorrow so that we do this, right? And then we have class theory test number 1 on 11th September. Remember, we had mentioned that we were going to pause on writing class theory test number 1 until we're done with requirements engineering. By the time we get to September 11th, we would have concluded with requirements engineering. In fact, I think by next week, Monday, we should be able to start system design, right? So diarize this. Class theory test is going to be on Friday, September 11th. The way this is going to be administered is exactly how we described it a while back. It's going to be an online assessment. We normally would make this available for within a 24-hour window period, but the assessment is going to be timed, right? It's probably going to be an hour long, maybe an hour and 20 minutes or something. But you want to prepare for this. You want to already start preparing because this is happening in the next 3 weeks, right? And you want to take this seriously because there's a considerable number of marks allocated to the test here. Okay, unless if any specific questions with regards to this, we'll continue. Any random thoughts about this? Okay, all right. So we continue our conversation. We did quite a bit last time we met. We got to a stage where we started walking through the structure of the so-called SRS document. And remember that we are using some sort of structured notation. Specifically, what the structured notation we are using is a template that's based on the IEEE standard 830-1998, right? So this it gives you a rundown of how exactly you're supposed to structure an SRS document. Some things are more specific, some of them are more guidelines. Some aspects like representation of features provides or is given in form of different variations, right? So you get to choose exactly how you'd want to represent your system features, right? Key takeaway point here is we are fundamentally making use of a structured notation. But in addition to that, we did make mention of the fact that we're going to incorporate certain design artifacts like use case diagrams, data for diagrams, specifically level 0, right? So-called context diagrams, and also tabular notation, right? Where we get to represent the use case description in some sort of tabular form to make it a lot easier for developers to be able to synthesize that. So we started working through the structure of the document, explaining what the different sections are all about. Granted, these details, I think, are available in here, right? So more details can be found in this document, which is available on the Moodle, actually. We're just glossing over the different sections, subsections, and sub-subsections to essentially give us an idea of what to expect. So we got to a stage where we talked about so-called assumptions and dependencies, right? So we're about to transition to system features. Right, so section 3 is essentially the part that is used to specify specific features associated with the system. And a feature is nothing more than, you typically would represent a feature by using description, right? Text, textual format, right? So a simple sentence or two to describe what the feature is all about. And then you have subsequent subsections that fall under that particular feature, right? So you have a feature associated with your system, and then the subsections will provide additional descriptions associated with that particular feature, right? It turns out that I wonder if anyone in the room can tell us, or is in a position to tell us, what the difference is between a feature and a functionality. You know, if a feature and, I don't know if feature and functionality. Well, what would you say is the difference here?
I think a feature is something that isn't isn't necessarily fundamental to the operation of the software, whereas what was the other component you said?
Functionality, feature
Yeah,
and
and then
functionality.
functionality obviously is necessary to how the software has to be constructed, or something along those lines.
No, not quite, actually. It turns out that, you see, you want to think of it from the nice way of visualizing or trying to understand this is if you try and think of, I guess, one of the most a piece of software that you use frequently, I suppose. A feature, it turns out, is more like it's a characteristic, right? A software is supposed to have features, right? So prominent characteristics associated with that piece of software. The functionality, on the other hand, is more the extent or the ability of the software to do something, right? So the reason I'm asking is because it turns out that if you look at the way this thing is structured, under features is where you start describing the different functionalities, right? If you notice here, there's a subsection where you have functional requirements associated with the feature, for instance. So one of the features of I'm trying to think of and easy to think that most people can easily relate to here. But, yeah. Anyway, if I think of if I think of a better example, an actual real life example, I'll explain to you. Just latch it out. But it turns out that functionalities are derived from software features, right? For example, if we say that we're building a software that has a feature that allows you to spell check, for instance, you'll be able to describe that particular feature, but also be able to itemize the specific functional requirements of this particular feature, the specific feature, right? So in the case example that we're using, for instance, one of the features is we could say automatic classification of automatic classification of digital object subjects, for instance. But you notice that the functionality associated with that particular feature, there's a number of functionalities tied to that, right? So a feature it's more or less like a high-level umbrella that describes a broad spectrum of functionalities that are related to a certain extent, right? But anyway, so your SRS document is supposed to optionally, right, have features represented separately, and each feature is supposed to have a corresponding description. But alongside that description should be specifics of the priority associated with that particular feature, right? So is this a very important feature, for instance? Let's say you're developing this makeup request application. Hopefully you eventually get to a stage where you list requirements like, oh, we're supposed to have a login feature, for instance. We're supposed to have a feature that allows the student to send through a makeup request, right, using a form or something. You have to prioritize these things. It turns out that some of the features are more important than others. The reason you want to prioritize them is because it's entirely possible that you will not be able to successfully implement all the features. Because you might anticipate that you'll be unable to implement them given the amount of time you have. You want to prioritize so that you begin with the most important features, right? So prioritization. And then as part of a subsection associated with system features, you want to list functional requirements as well, right? So description and specific functional requirements. So you itemize the different functional requirements associated with the feature itself. So you notice a feature will have one or more functional requirements associated with it. Right? Section 4 is so-called data requirements, right? The average system will typically take in input, right? And there's some sort of processing that happens, and then an output is produced, right? So you produce information. So the data requirements section is meant to explicitly state what those input and outputs are, right? You typically have things like logical data models, right? So these ER diagrams that you're discussing with hopefully with Mr. Wali. I don't know if you've gotten to the stage where you know how to model entity relationships, right? When you're implementing a relational database management system, those are the things that will be lumped into the logical data model, right? That alongside other use case diagrams or artifacts like class diagrams, for instance. Incidentally, class diagrams are one of those artifacts we're going to look at once we start looking at the design lecture series. I'd mentioned last week that we will probably skip ER modeling because I think you all mentioned that you've already looked at this in 3010. So might as well just make better use of that time, I guess. And then you'd also have in that particular section a data dictionary, right, where you specify data structures and the corresponding meaning of the data structures, right? Data types and specific formats that you're going to use as part of your software. But also, what you do is you get to, if applicable, you get to describe the different types of reports that are going to be generated by your system. It's not uncommon. It's almost always the case that these information systems that you typically build will be used to generate some sort of reports, right? Different sort of reports. I don't know, I keep making reference to the makeup request application here because I have an interest in that application, right? I might, if I'm a user, if I'm a lecturer and I use that application, I might be interested in generating a report at the end of the semester. How many students requested for makeups in quiz number 1? You don't expect a user using your application to go to the database and run some SQL query. They can do that, but you don't want them to do that. Instead, you want to make sure that you have a feature that enables end users to be able to generate reports, different types of reports, right? Can we find, is there a particular trait associated with the people that request makeups, for instance? You know, is there a particular trait, strange things like that, right? But also, you want to be able to specify, especially if your application does a lot of data processing, you want to be able to specify details associated with data, right? So the data acquisition process, integrity, retention periods associated with data, and any potential data disposal plans, right? So this is more to do with records management, but you can think of it from the perspective of, let's say, applications that are expected to store information over prolonged periods of time. So for instance, makeup request application. I might want to keep those records, I guess, until students graduate, because we know that someone might maybe not graduate, but maybe until the end of the year or something. We know that someone might just come through and say, no, but I requested for makeup, and I wrote the makeup and whatnot. I requested for the makeup, but I was not accorded the opportunity to write the makeup. So you want to make sure that the data is available so that you're able to verify such, I guess, such complaints or something, right? So the key thing here is you need to have a section where you get to describe these things. UNZA probably has a retention period associated with student records data, right? I wouldn't be surprised if those records are going to be kept for, I don't know if I was talking to you first, I don't know if I said this, but maybe for 100 years at least until you are alive, right? We've heard of these strange stories where they say an MP has what's the word again? They have a dubious qualification. They never went to this college, so it's a fake certificate or something. What do you do to verify that? You go back to the institution, and hopefully that institution has a reasonable retention period associated with the data, right? Data they're keeping about their students. These are important things. I do hope the UNZA, I wouldn't be surprised if I was to go to the UNZA to ask for my results, which I got in 2007. I wouldn't be surprised if they still have them 13 years later, right? That's the idea behind retention anyway. Granted, right? Once you look at this template, what you notice is that it explicitly states, the placeholders will explicitly state that some of these fields are optional, right? So if they're not applicable to the project that you're working on, do not include them, right? You just leave it out. Yeah. This is also specified in this document. It's clearly outlined that you can actually leave out things that are not applicable to what you're doing. So it's not like when you download this template, and once you start working towards this template with your respective group team members, it's not like we expect you guys to fill out everything that is in here. That's no. That's not what we expect. We expect you to only work with the relevant aspects of this particular document. Yeah. So if you think that the idea of these non-functional requirements like performance requirements are not applicable to what you're doing, then you leave it out. Yeah. Good stuff. So so number 5 is external interface requirements. This should be familiar now because it's related to what we discussed when we were looking at so-called system interface analysis here. So the idea behind section number 5, which is external interface requirements, is you want to be able to state external or third-party applications that are going to be interacting with your software. Now, this could be applications that are interested in the data that is being generated or produced by your application. And but also applications that you might be interested in interacting with so that you extract data from them. Right? So it's a back and forth here. There's usually applications that might be interested in data being processed or stored by your application, but your application might also be interested in data that's being generated by external third-party software tools. And this is the case for the APIs that you're going to be interacting with, right? You are interested in the data on the other side. All right. So you typically also describe the user interfaces associated with your application. Now, I want to mention something that already I think highlighted when Elijah was trying to find out what it is they would have to do as a group if they found themselves in a situation where they produce an SRS document, but then realize that they missed out important information. I highlighted the fact that you would have to version your document, right? So that the next time you are making a change to the document, you state what sort of change you made and why you made that change, right? So there's usually a part which has the revision history, yeah? And the reason I'm saying this is because there are certain things, like the part to do with the user interface. Perhaps you might leave it blank here and then just fill it up once we have a discussion of, I guess, system design or something. I do hope we get the chance to look at wireframing or something. But anyway, so you'd have a section dedicated to outlining the user interfaces associated with your system, right? Different characteristics associated with the user interface, but also the software interfaces. Now, this would be the specific web services that you're going to be interacting with, obviously, APIs that you're going to be interacting with. So if you are building an application that is supposed to be interfaced with Google Calendar, for instance, you want to be able to explain or describe how that integration is going to be done in this particular section. If applicable, you'd also describe details to do with the hardware, right? I guess if you're implementing some embedded system of sorts, it might not be applicable for the toy projects that we're working towards here. So leave this out here. But if it were applicable, then you'd probably describe the different hardware interfaces that are associated with a piece of software implementing. So if you were developing some gaming console, something, some arcade gaming console, right? You'd be able to describe the different hardware interfaces associated with that and how it links to the piece of software that you're developing. But you also want to describe the different communication interfaces, right? If your product is going to, if the piece of software that you're developing is going to make use of certain communication channels, like email, for instance, this is where you'd have to describe these things. And it's actually not uncommon to do this, right? Typically, and we expect people to do this in your respective projects, right? If I'm a student and I'm requesting a makeup, I need some sort of notification that my request has been submitted. Cheap trick that people use is an automatically generated email, right? Which is sent to both the lecturer in this case and the student, right? So you automatically send through an email to the student notifying them that your makeup request has been submitted or something. Right? So you describe those sort of communication interfaces that you'd be using. All right, so section 6 is a part where you get to describe quality attributes. Now remember, these quality attributes are associated with non-functional requirements. We want to be very careful not to say this is where you state the non-functional requirements. Why? Because we know that there are certain non-functional requirements that are not necessarily quality attributes, right? Fortunately for us, the quality attributes in the template, some of the most popular quality attributes have been listed for us in the template. So you can just pad in the values in there. So things like the usability of the piece of software. From the perspective of ease of use, for instance, the learning curve, ease of learning. Right? And by the way, these are things we are going to discuss once we look at experimental software engineering, right? So we'll look at exactly how we get to measure things like usability and ease of use. It turns out that it's easy, really. There are already predefined measurement instruments that are available out there. I work with students who almost always do some usability study, right? And so measurement instruments like SUMI and SAS, I guess, are quite popular with the students just because they're quite easy to use, right? So the quality attributes, you specify all the non-functional requirements associated with quality of the software, so things like usability, performance, security, if applicable. We expect to see something to the effect of security here in almost all the platforms that you're implementing here, right? Yeah, I think we do, to a certain extent. So any potential safety requirement associated with a piece of software, if applicable, or any additional quality attributes, which is why in your template, you'll find a section that's tagged as 6.x with others. So the idea behind this is you can spawn more quality attributes associated with your software. Section 7 is to do with localization and internationalization. I'm not sure if you've discussed this in 3010. This is something you should be discussing, right? Especially with development here. But the idea behind internationalization is you want to make sure that you're developing a piece of software that can be used in different regions, right? So you want that to be the case because different regions will use different time zones, for instance, or use different languages. So you want your piece of software to be easily adaptable. If you think that that's an important aspect associated with a piece of software, then all those details would have to go here. Localization is why it's possible for us to, I was going to latch on to Google, that's fine. I'm going to latch on to Google Calendar, but that's fine. It's localized, by the way. It's a classic example of a piece of software that's localized. Same goes for Microsoft Word, right? You can configure a language. You can configure your currency, right? So that when you're writing a document that involves you including monetary values, you make use of the quote instead of the default dollar or something, or pound or euro or something, right? All right. What's the difference between internationalization and localization? I don't know. So section 8 is meant for any other requirements that don't fit into these sections that we described here. So you'd include them there, right? If this is not applicable, you leave it out, right? So you just squash out section number 8. And then obviously you need to have an appendix section, right? So appendices section where you list things like the glossary. So specific technical terms that are specific to the software that you're developing. Acronyms and abbreviations, right? With the corresponding definitions. So that whoever is reading through the document knows what you're talking about when you say, I don't know if people have come up with acronyms for the software that they're developing. So the case example software, for instance, I've called it SIRD. I'll probably include it in the glossary so that whoever is reading through the document knows exactly what that means. You might want to include an optional section where you have analysis models, right? So these models will make sense once we go through the system design, once we look at the different UML artifacts. Turns out that, so we might look at, I'm not sure if we're going to look at state transition diagrams. I don't think it would be important here. But anyway, so any analysis models that are associated with a piece of software would fall into Appendix B, essentially, right? Flow charts or flow diagrams. All right, are there any questions? Just gonna pause here to find out if people have any specific questions. I don't know if people have already started going through this important document. This is an extremely important that you should be going through right now. This thing here, not the template, but the standard, the IEEE standard. You want to make sure that you familiarize yourself with this document. You don't have to read it page by page, right? It's meant to be a reference, right? So just visit the relevant sections of the document. Plus, it's a short document, it's only 39 pages, right? So as you're going through these notes, you want to make sure that you make reference to this document because we're using this as a basis for the template that we're using, right? If you notice, the outline that we have here is similar to the template that we're using, which is this thing here. All right, if there are no questions, then so what I'd done with the case example is I'd started fleshing out this document, but I realized that it's going to have certain components that will. So there are certain sections that will have to be left blank because we only need to fill them in once we look at system design. And so it's partially complete right now. I will upload it nonetheless so that you use it as a reference, I suppose, as you are developing your respective SRS documents. But you notice that all I'm doing is I'm making use of the template to just fill in the blanks essentially, right? Starting with the title page. So we are building up on the problem statement that has been shared on the Moodle. This is a platform that is meant to enable postgraduate students to upload ETD manuscripts, essentially. So we expect you guys to do the same thing, right? So the title page must have the names of all the individuals that are participating in drafting the document, right? We expect to see this. Things like the date, the name of the software, and the abbreviation, if your piece of software has an abbreviation. And then you start filling in the rest, right? Assign an initial version to your document, and then as we gradually continue making changes to this document, like for instance, once we're done with certain portions of system design, we would expect you to revise the document to take into account or to signal the fact that you've incorporated additional content to the document. Right, so case example, SIRD. So this is what I was saying here, that the document is, so what I'm going to upload is probably going to have, not probably, actually, it is going to have sections that you are supposed to leave blank per se, because we haven't discussed these things. So the document I'm going to upload will have things like the context diagram, for instance, but we haven't discussed that. We haven't looked at how exactly we come up with this data flow diagram, level 0 diagram. And so we expect you to just leave it blank, and then we'll update it once we have a discussion of those different artifacts, right? So just take note that as you're developing your SRS document, if a particular section requires input or an artifact that you are unfamiliar with, just leave it blank for now. Especially anything to do with the design artifacts, we expect you to leave them blank. The design artifacts and also details to do with quality attributes, right? Usability. We'll only discuss these during experimentation. It would be nice to just flesh it out and just include a few things and then change them once you gain a firm understanding of what needs to be done, I suppose. All right, so I'm looking at the time here, and I'm going to suggest that we finish off this tomorrow. I think there's only a few slides. There's a few slides remaining. We'll finish off tomorrow. So we'll look at validation and checking, and then look at requirements change, and then we'll have finished this. So if tomorrow's class, if we wrap up tomorrow's class, let's say in the first half of the session, then we can have the informal interaction I was talking about. If the interaction tomorrow takes the entire session, then we'll defer the informal interaction to Monday when we have class. I really want us to have the interaction to make sure that we're doing the right thing, especially when it comes to elicitation. Are there any questions? I'm wondering if I'm even still online here. People are not.
We're doing like a presentation tomorrow.
Yeah, well, so this was what I was saying. The plan was for us to have like informal presentations, but I think let's finish off. I was actually hoping that today would finish off the last two bits, validation and change. But let's see if we can quickly wrap up validation and change, and then we'll have the informal presentations. Yeah. So it's just informal presentations. They're not graded. They're more for you guys. It's an opportunity for us to ask questions, I suppose. Clarification with regards to elicitation. We want to make sure we're doing the right thing. Yeah. Any other questions? Thanks for that.
In connection to the previous recordings, they are not appearing on the Moodle.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a bit weird. Just quickly. Okay. Any other? I'll look into this. In fact, we can do this together right now. Maybe you can. Any other concerns or comments? Did you guys think that there was not going to be an exam, right? Is this why we normally have? Now, this is the thing about life, right? People always come outside the woodwork when they notice that things are really serious. You know, there were people that just decided to vanish and not be a part of these conversations, and then now is when they're coming out of the woodwork and, oh no, can we submit the proposal? I'm like, you're not serious with life, right? You really want to be serious with your life? Of course, I mean, sorry about that. I see this is the reason why, oh my goodness, this is the reason why they were not appearing, they were hidden. So I'm just going to unhide this. They should be available now. Thank you for that. They are available now. Yeah, the world is not going to wait for anybody here. Full steam ahead. Out of interest, so I want to ask this because the implementation part, right? Have you gotten to a stage where you know how to develop a simple web application, for instance? Is this in 3010 web application or mobile application? Think are you in a position to do that now?
Your question again, sir?
Relative to what you're doing in 3010, have you gotten to a stage where you're able to develop a web application, for instance? Or do you see where 3010 fits into what we're doing right now, especially when it comes to the implementation? Because listen, once we're done with the design, the expectation is that you guys will have to start implementing, right? The assumption we keep on making is that you know how to program. Now, knowing how to program is one thing. Learning or appreciating what sort of tools, technology stacks to use is a completely different thing, which is why I guess in 3010, you are going to be introduced to certain web frameworks. At the very least, maybe you'll be introduced to like some server-side frameworks or something, I don't know. Is this something that you've started doing? Have you done this or you haven't covered this yet?
So in all honesty, this is the only class that's actually serious. Like for me, the other courses aren't where we should be.
Okay, because the reason I'm asking this is for this to be more interesting and for this to be more impactful. What I want, the idea I had for this course is that we produce something, right? And we are going to produce something. So if by the time we're starting implementation, if it's a bit hard for people to produce something, I want us to see if we can just have short sessions to just introduce you to some tools that are used for rapid application development. Like for instance, when you're looking at those graphical user interface in Java or something, JOption pen and whatnot, I don't know if Pierre mentioned to you, but there are tools that you can use to generate the interfaces, right? So you generate code. Nobody writes the components from scratch. The same goes for HTML. In as much as you are going to be taught, hopefully in 3010, how to construct a web page that looks like this, right? Labels and hyperlinks and icons and images and whatnot. You don't have to do this. There are tools that you can use to automatically generate this. There are frameworks that you can use to do this. So we want to see if we can find time to help you get started, right? Maybe we can also have for those of you that are developing mobile applications, we can introduce you to easy to use frameworks for developing mobile applications, right? Just to get started. This is why I keep asking this. There's a reason why I'm asking how far you've gone, because there is a component that requires implementation. Now, if you're not yet at the stage where you're able to put together a web application, dynamic web application, then we need to find a solution to that issue, right? That problem. So we'll see. Let's just hope, fingers crossed here. I hope by the time we are wrapping up with design, which we anticipate is going to be by September. Actually, we should be by mid-September. We should be done with design, and then we start looking at aspects to do with implementation. And this is like version control and all the nice stuff. All right, so I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks a lot. Please be serious with this. This is a serious thing here. This whole program that you're doing. I know COVID-19 has disrupted a lot of things, but the ship is still sailing here. So you don't want to be the person who's going to have to repeat a year because they didn't do a course or something. If we are lucky, maybe the 14 of you, or the less than 20 of you that have been attending this session will at least proceed to 40 or something. Thanks a lot. See you, and cheers.
Bye.